You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to thewritingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS, together as one, we get it done.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to season 9 of the Writing Community Chat Show. I can't believe it's back and here in its actual self, because obviously some of you know my PC's broken and we're relying heavily on this lovely little laptop here. But it's since the end of season 8, which for me has been a nightmare. It's 3 weeks without you guys in the chat. It's 3 weeks without the community listening to one of the amazing stories that we have on the show. So I'm hoping this all works out really well. Always had its ups and downs, and we've loved every minute of it. So there you go. Thank you guys for tuning in the chat already. Seeing you there, Kevin. Hello to you, Anya, Brandon. Nice to see you all, guys, and Kevin as well. I get to see your name twice. So I'm so excited about that. So season 9, as I mentioned, season 8 was absolutely wonderful. How can it get better season after season? It just does. I don't know. The likes of our very own SPO Farrell, Steve Farrell was with us. Louise Mumford, Chandler Bolt from Self Publishing School was with us. Magician Pete Heat actually celebrated our 2-year birthday, if you remember. And how can I forget my most favorite show of all time with Max Brooks, an absolute hero of mine that came on the show. They all joined me to share their stories, their life stories, and their work, which is just incredible to hear all of that and their kind of tips and their experience come into life, whether they're indie authors or not. And of course, if you have any suggestions for an author, maybe not even an author, of someone with a great story you want to come on this show, of course, drop me a DM on Twitter or send me an email at thewritingcommunitychatshow@gmail.com, and I will have a look into that for you. Of course, always looking for great suggestions in there. So what else? Let's not forget about the amazing discussion panels we had on. We learned about fantasy, the paranormal. We had authors from Aesthetic Press come on and tell us what it's like working for a publishing house. So there was really a lot of dynamics in there, a lot of things to learn, and a lot of things to laugh about, of course, with the panel shows, which will be back this season. There are some wonderful guests lined up, including tonight's guest, and moving on for the next 2 months already booked up, guys. So it's incredible. What is coming back next month is the Crime Writers Festival in Harrogate, which, of course, we did last year. Vlogged that very embarrassingly, and it was great fun. It was still kind of in lockdown last year for that. This year is not. It's fully going ahead with a massive guest list, and I am going back to that. And I'm going to be meeting up with an old friend there, which I won't say much more about. But you guys might be able to figure that one out yourselves, and you'll have to subscribe to see what that is, because there's a lot of live shows. We want your questions in, guys. Of course, there's a section at the end of the show for you to send your questions in, but send them in throughout as well. If we can answer them, we will. And yeah, you want to subscribe because there are some great guests coming up, and you know that Harrogate show. If I do dare take the camera, who knows what we will see this year, because it was always an interesting show to do, isn't it? So let me get on with tonight's show. Season 9, amazing, can't believe it. Tonight's guest is someone who's been a journalist in their life before becoming an author, and I'm sure there'd be a lot to discuss about that in kind of how that relates, and how that experience kind of feeds into being a writer now, I guess. She has won awards for journalism and her writing. She's actually won the CWA in Fleming Steel Dagger Award, which is incredible. She's worked for the Sunday Times, the Daily Telegraph, and the Washington Post, which is amazing. The Crime Writers Association described the Lions as a deeply uncomfortable read, which lingers in the memory, and her latest book, The Hunt and Kill, won Times Thriller of the Month. So there you go. That's a great little insight to what her writing's like. And of course, we will find out all about that just after this little video. My name is Chris, and you are watching the Writing Community Chat Show. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Holly Watt. Hello, Holly.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely wonderful to be having season 9 here, and what a wonderful guest to start off the show. Holly, thank you for joining me. I hope you're well.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm still on that. I was listening to you talking about Harrogate just then. And I actually went there last year, and at the time, we were all just sort of coming out of lockdown. Everybody's like really overexcited and sort of can't remember how to interact with other human beings, this and the other. And somehow I'm still there, like almost a year on, just being like wildly excited about interacting with people. So sorry about that.
It's incredible. We were there last year, but we must have probably crossed paths many times. And it's just one of those things that even though it was kind of on a lower scale than it is kind of this year, there was still so much going on and so many people interacting in different areas of the place. It's just incredible. Are you going this year out of interest?
I'm not going this year because I was on a panel last year, which was great. And the only problem for me for Harrogate is that I'm based in Devon, and Harrogate to Devon it's not a short journey.
It really isn't.
So I will definitely be going back soon. But in fact, at Harrogate last year, I had my then how old was he? Maybe like 6-week-old baby with me. So I was quite, it's a bit of a challenge. And he didn't massively enjoy the 6-hour train journey to get there. So I will probably leave it a bit longer before.
Yeah, well, I broke down on the way back from Harrogate driving to Wales. And it was about 20 minutes outside of Harrogate. And that ordeal took me about 12 hours to get home. And it was just horrendous with a hangover. So I agree with you. Journey up there is not kind of ideal, but let's hope it's worth it again this year. But Holly, fantastic for you to be here. Generally in life now, coming out of lockdown, obviously with a young family as well. How is life treating you?
It's really good actually at the moment. I've just finished the edits on book 4. So I've written the Case Benedict series to the lines of the first one, and then it was The Deadline, then The Hunt and Kill was the most recent one, which came out last year. And the 4th one is actually the subject of quite discussions with my editor about what it's actually called, so I can't say that yet. I find it incredibly difficult titling books. It's just really, really hard. It's one of those things you think you either have the perfect title from the absolute start, or it very stubbornly just doesn't come. And book 4 is resisting. But hopefully we'll get there. And I'm at the moment, I'm just starting to write a standalone, so completely separate from the series. I think just because, although I absolutely love writing the series, I sort of worked out I've now written 400,000 words on the Casey Benedict and her sidekicks, and although I absolutely love her as a character, and I love like the world that I've sort of created over 4 books, I think I need a bit of time out from that.
Well, I bet. Yeah. I mean, we'll get on to writing a series in a bit because there's lots of questions I want to ask around that. And it's also nice to be changing direction, like you just mentioned there. So it'll be interesting to see why that decision's come along, but and get into the ins and outs on how you got to that point. But before we do that, of course, on this show, what I like to do is to rewind the tape right back and find out just where the journey led to you becoming an author, what the inspirations were, and all of those sorts of good things. So I'll play this video and then we'll get stuck into that. So Holly, the road to writing, let's find out where it all began. At what point did you kind of know you wanted to be a writer? And of course, I mentioned journalism being in there. How did that all come around, and how much does that kind of feed into that world then of writing?
So I think I always wrote stories. I mean, I actually remember like when I was sort of like really, really young, like 5 or 6, I'd write these long, complicated sort of, terrible narratives that went on and on without any sort of anything, but it was always there. I always absolutely loved it. And then I actually did English literature at university, which again sort of completely submerged me in the world of writing. Although not actually me doing creative writing, but just sort of this whole sort of bath of literature. And then I started, then I had a disastrous year at law school, which is best forgotten and sort of left to the past because that was not my finest hour. So having flunked out from that, I actually ended up doing work experience at the Sunday Times. And I walked in and I was like, yes, this is what I'm meant to be doing. And the Sunday Times was like, no, it's not. You're some like, work experience with absolutely no experience in journalism whatsoever. And you're not meant to be here. And I was like, no, but I am. And so I basically...
It's my destiny.
I really did feel like that. I was like, no, this is where I'm meant to be. And then they were like, no, it's not. But I basically ended up staying sort of in quite a sort of determined way. And I was at the Sunday Times for 4 years, and then the Telegraph, and then I actually was at the Washington Post for a summer because they do a secondment thing, a fellowship scheme, which is why I was there. Although that was the summer of the first Obama election, which was a pretty amazing time to be there.
I bet that was.
It was extraordinary. I still kind of, can sort of feel like, oh, it was incredible. And then I moved to The Guardian, and that's where I was for about 3 years. And all that time, I mean, it was funny in hindsight because I was a news journalist, and, news journalism, it's so formulaic, the writing style, because it's designed to be moved around by subs at high speed. There's no, it's well written by lots of writers, but it's not like there's no sort of artistic sort of merit in there.
Yeah.
So I didn't really have any sort of, and I was actually really shy of writing features. I felt like that was sort of like the sort of greater creative powers than me. So I really didn't write many at all the way through. And then, sorry, I'm burbling here, but this is just trying to get you through.
No, that's all.
And then I was at The Guardian, and I was working, so I was on the investigations team at both The Telegraph and then The Guardian. And at The Guardian, we were working on the Panama Papers, so that would have been 2016, I suppose. But it was a long, long story, that one. It was, I think, 11 million documents that had leaked to the international consortium of, I always forget, ITIJ. I'm just going to... So we were working with journalists around the world, which was a great experience. But it was before that, when I was at The Telegraph, I'd done a lot of traveling. I'd been all over the world and everything else like that. And whereas the Panama Papers were very much like in a room in King's Cross, and it was fascinating. It was a really important story, but it wasn't the same kind of, basically, like, adrenaline drive the whole time. And I think I got to the end of that, and I think I probably had time to think about investigative journalism for a bit and sort of process it, because it had been like a completely crazy 10 years. I'd I'd been to Afghanistan, I'd been to Libya, I'd been, all over the world. I'd done lots of undercover work, which was a very strange thing to do. And I think there was just a lot. And I just sort of essentially, in a sort of almost trying to process it way, started writing, and then sort of started writing. And then I was like, oh, this could actually be a novel in a weird way. And that sort of gradually became To the Lions.
Well, you kind of make everyone else right now listening to this feel absolutely kind of underachieved, perhaps, with the amount of things that you've done and traveled the world. I mean, what a crazy journey. And I bet you've got some unbelievable stories in there from traveling the world, but also undercover kind of really intrigues me. But that alone sounds like a character in a I don't know, an action film. You've almost created that character yourself and lived that character, and now you can portray it on the page. I mean, how much of that has gone into your writing?
I think, Casey Benedict is definitely not me, mainly because she's a complete sort of, I'm not going to say the word.
You can say it on this show, it's fine.
No. But I think there are definitely like autobiographical elements, but it's not an autobiography. And there's a lot of experience in there. So there's lots of, there's weird things that you find out when you've done undercover work, which you just don't know unless you've done it. I think one of them is when you've got a camera on. So I'd have like a buttonhole camera here and a microphone sort of here or wherever it was. And if you're talking to somebody and they say something interesting, your absolute instinct thing is to lean in and go like, oh, really? That's your human interaction. But if you do that when you're wearing a camera, the camera goes off like at one angle. So now you're filming their shoes. And also when you move, the microphone crackles.
Ruffles.
So you lose both the kind of sound and the film, the footage. And it's just stuff like that. I know that because I've made that mistake. And, so that sort of thing's in the book. There's kind of that's really what it's like doing undercover stuff, which I think I'm not there aren't that many undercover journalists who've now written books. So I think that. Yeah.
I mean, what must have that been like? Firstly, I compare the two because they're both nerve-wracking moments in your life. Firstly, stepping into the first company you worked for, I can't remember what that was, sorry. And then Sunday Times, and then stepping into a world of undercover. Did you kind of feel in either of those situations you were prepared for that at the time?
No, not at all. And that's the thing about undercover work, is you can't really prepare for it. You kind of, one day you are doing it, or one day you haven't done it, and the next day you're in a situation where you are doing it. And I mean, I certainly went, when I first started, it was something weird, like getting in somewhere and like recording somebody making a speech. So I wasn't the focus and I wasn't interacting with them. So in some ways you can have a bit of a soft sort of start. But yeah, and certainly at the Sunday Times I had absolutely no idea what I was meant to be doing.
Wow. So if you had a writing tip, I guess, for someone who wants to step into that world of journalism, kind of like you did, and they're perhaps saying this is not where you should be, what advice have you got for them?
Well, so for journalism, in particular news journalism, it's a tough industry, and you will do things. People come and talk to me about, like kind of career guidance-y type stuff. And, I think there are different bits of journalism, obviously. But I think one of the things is that, like just asking somebody, how would you feel about knocking on somebody's door just after their child has died and asking them how they feel? And if you're not comfortable with doing that, which, no one actually is comfortable with doing that because it's not a nice thing to do. But, a lot of people actually want to tell the story of their child or whatever that happens to be. And it's, it's called a death knock, and it's not something that I hated anything like that. I never enjoyed it. I never wanted to do it, but you just, you had to do it. So I think in journalism, it's being pretty tough, basically. But in writing fiction, it's much more fun. And you can do, you can have somebody knock on the door and the person's there, opens the door and is like, yes, I'm dying to tell you everything I know. Here are all the clues you need to go and find the next phase of this story.
Brilliant. Amazing. But part of your journey as well, you mentioned going around the world, and I've got to talk about this. Flying in Lynxes really interests me for a reason that I used to work with them, and Air Force One.
Yes.
Talk to us about that, because that's incredible.
Well, that was when I was at the Washington Post, and it was the summer before Obama became president. So it was George Bush was still in charge. So it was like a genuinely weird time, because they have a completely different approach to political journalism in America. That, like, here in this country, we have much, much more kind of, that Boris Johnson, we don't know where he is most of the time, or what he's doing, or how he's doing it. I mean, we obviously have, quite a sort of comprehensive idea, but like in America, Boris Johnson. But in America, there's there's a White House press corps, and they know where the president is all the time and what he's doing and what he's doing next, and it's minute by minute, and it's just a completely different approach to journalism. And that summer, George Bush basically was out in Texas most of the time, because he kept popping up and saying to the McCain campaign, be like, "Do you need me in any way? Shall I go somewhere? Can I?" And they were like, "No, that's fine. You stay in Texas."
That's incredible.
But even so, you move when the president moves in America. The press corps knows where he is, and you travel in the convoy with him, which is this extraordinary sight. Again, when I was sort of following Gordon Brown around during the 2009 election, literally, I remember at one point we got stuck in a traffic jam and then end up in a pub in Kilburn with lots of cross Liberal Democrats outside, and it was just literally this sort of constant sort of, basically the whole thing was the thick of it, but not even that organized. Whereas in America, it's just this sort of cavalcade with ambulances and lots of people with guns and this, that, and the other. So it's a completely different experience. And of course, Air Force One at the end of it. But I remember at that point, because he was staying on his ranch in just outside Waco, and weirdly, and one day he was meant to be flying to the airport where Air Force One was waiting in a helicopter, but the helicopters couldn't land at the ranch because it was too windy, and so he got the convoy to the airport, and the press corps no, you can't have that. You can't have him traveling without us, because it's fine if he goes by helicopter, but he can't travel on his own without us knowing where he is. What if he has a car crash? What if this? What if that? What if the other? Boris Johnson would just be completely stunned if the British press expected that degree of awareness of what he was doing.
Definitely, yeah. Incredible, isn't it? But it goes to show the difference in the seriousness of politics in America and Britain, I guess, isn't it? That's enough said on that one. So Lynx helicopters, when did you get in one of those? Because I used to work with those in the Army Air Corps, and they're kind of out of service, I think, now. So an amazing machine. So
again, a slightly weird cul-de-sac professionally. I must be 2011 or 12, around about then. I was sent out to go on something called RFA Fort Victoria, which is a very big ship, which at the time was in Oman and traveling around the Indian Ocean, because there was a huge problem with piracy at the time in the coastline around Somalia. So there were kind of lots of Royal Marines on Fort Victoria, and they were just sort of trundling around. And I was meant to be on this ship for maybe 48 hours. I can't remember. Getting on at Oman and then just sort of showed around, and then off, I would just be chucked back into Salale, I think it was, in Oman, and off they would go. But so the ship got some extra information, some intelligence about like some Somali ship going off somewhere, and they were like, we must follow this ship, or this boat, tiny boat that's there. And so off Fort Victoria shot in the wrong direction, and I was then like stuck on this boat and couldn't get off. So I think I was on it for like 3 weeks. I mean, possibly even like it was just, and it was like bobbing around in the Indian Ocean. I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I can't.
There was literally a TV program on recently on the BBC about a submarine and a journalist doing the same, kind of investigator doing the same thing, and she was stuck. Maybe they copied your story, because that's incredible. That's fantastic.
And one of the things, because basically, I mean, I don't know where you spent time with the Lynxes, but like on Fort Victoria, basically people were quite bored a lot of the time. I mean, every so often they'd be sort of like, oh, there might be a Somali pirate, 100 miles that way, whatever it was, off we'd go. So basically the Lynx helicopter pilots were like, do you want to go up on a Lynx? And I was like, of course. Yeah. So off we went.
That's mad. Brilliant. I mean, what an experience. It goes on top of all the other crazy things that you've done. So after all that madness in your life, which is incredible, it sounds fantastic, you stepped into the world of writing. What was the first step for you there? How did you start that journey?
So I think the first thing I tried to write was like basically a terrible chick-litty type thing, which luckily has never seen the light of day, and that really didn't work. But I think it was like a really important experience. Like I wrote it, and sort of there it was, and that would have been quite a long time before I wrote To the Lions. And I think kind of I got a bit sort of not disillusioned by it, but kind of like I was just not very good. I think one of my aunts was like, it's quite Mills and Booney, and I was like, which is great, but at the same time wasn't quite what I was aiming for. And so basically. But while I was at the Telegraph, so I think it's 3 now, I had at one point, I was going to write a book about political party funding, very exciting. And so I had talked to an agent about that. And so then I started writing To the Lions. So then some other really good friends of mine read it and were like, you actually should finish this book, which was really supportive at like the right time. Because I think like, when you're writing a book, you have a kind of surge of like, oh, I can do this. And then you're like 10,000 or 20,000 words in, and you're like, I cannot do this. This is a disaster. And then so eventually I got to the end of writing the first draft of To the Lions and sent it off to Andrew Gordon, who's now my agent. And he mainly does nonfiction. So I think I was a bit surprised to have something which is clearly fiction. And anyway, but he was like, okay, fine. But then he was like, well, this is a very good first draft. And I was like, oh, I thought that was my novel. I thought I'd done that.
I mean, don't we all feel that way?
And at least 2 or 3 drafts later, it finally went off, which was great.
But even that first book, that's the one that won the CWA Dagger, Steel Dagger,
yes.
Which is an incredible feat. Did you ever expect to have
no
such response to that book?
No. I mean, and also it was amazing To the Lions because it's published by Raven Bloomsbury, so the imprint of Bloomsbury, who are really great, and I love my editor there. But I'm not convinced they thought it was going to win the Steel Dagger either. So I think they were totally surprised. I think it was weird because like you publish a book as a debut novelist, and it is obviously the most extraordinary sort of, I think most people who write books, it's probably been their lifelong dream to write a book, and seeing it in the bookshop and seeing it in an actual, it's an amazing, incredible moment. But I think for a lot of people, it can be a bit anticlimactic because out it goes, and like 5 people buy it, 3 of whom are closely related to you, and you're like, it's great, but it's like, it's also like, okay, and life goes on. And actually, with To the Lions, we were incredibly lucky because, first of all, Val McDermott, who is obviously an amazing writer, but she has her New Blood panel at Harrogate, and she picked to the Lions for that. And that was hugely important because it just sort of slightly gave it a sort of, people were like, oh, okay, well, if she thinks it's good, then I should probably, so that, it was incredible. Like that was a kind of completely life-changing thing. And Claire McIntosh was hugely supportive as well, and sort of put it into her. She has a book club on Facebook, which is brilliant. So if you're interested, she's very good. And, so it was just like, that's the thing. Although quite a few of Claire McIntosh's Facebook people were like, I don't like this book. And I was like, okay, all right, never mind. And then sort of, went on, and then it got nominated for the CWA Steel Dagger. And, I thought Longlist was amazing, and then I got shortlist. And then I just didn't expect it at all to win, but it did. It was great.
Incredible. Do you remember at what point you kind of received that information that it was longlisted?
Now where would
or in fact when it won, was there like a moment where you went, oh yeah, so what?
They had an award ceremony back in the day when there were routinely award ceremonies. Very exciting. And I was at that, and and it was dinner, and it was all very nice. I was really enjoying it because I was out for dinner, and it was great. And I didn't expect at all to win it. And like I think if you're suave and sophisticated, you have actual kind of like thank you things in your head to say, and I just absolute nonsense. I'm very overexcited, and yeah.
Did you have to go up on stage and then give a speech? I totally wasn't expecting this.
No, that really wasn't. And I think other people do it, and they're like, I'd like to thank the Academy, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is so exciting. And then at the end of the, the Steel Dagger, the actual award is like quite a sort of like menacing looking thing, and it was in this like hotel in London that this event was held, and at the end of it, like the really sweet people from Bloomsbury were like trying to get me a taxi, but it was like Uber were taking forever and you couldn't get a taxi, and I was just like, I was gonna get on the tube, like, because it really won't take me long on the tube. I was like, I got on the tube with this thing that basically looked like a proper weapon, and people were like, wow, who is that person and what are they doing? Even by the standards of the London Tube, it was a bit like, what?
You definitely got to raise some eyebrows on the tube. It's going to be something special, isn't it? I mean, incredible journey there. That novel was called a deeply uncomfortable read in the best kind of sense. I mean, that's a great thing to for it to be called, but then which lingers long in the memory. Did you have any idea that you were going to write something that was kind of along that lines? I mean, the character that you've written has gone all the way through it up to your standalone now. Did you have an idea at that point you were going to write a series? And
no.
Did you think you'd get a reaction like that?
No, I think basically, I think we had on one level, like when my very first conversation with my agent about, so I'd written the first draft by then, I was in his office in Soho, and like the whole time in his office in Soho, I was like, remember this moment because you're in your agent. I mean, he's not even actually my agent yet, he's just sort of having a meeting with me and like in Soho, and this alone is a sort of moment of like, wow. But he was like, from the absolute start, he was like, yeah, so, I enjoyed the book and he was like, and have you thought about, could it be a series? And I like, it's sort of the hubris involved in that. I think as a writer, like, especially as a debut writer, you're like, well, I'm going to try and write this book and I'm going to try and get it to like, finished and then hopefully, somebody somewhere will read it. But the idea of like planning ahead for it to be a series just wasn't really part of it. Although at the same time, like the absolute opposite of that was that, you could see that there's obviously a lot of police procedurals out there and there's a lot of, spy novels and this and the other, whereas there aren't that many journalism thrillery based things, she says in a really kind of articulate way. So you could see possibly. And then in my first meeting with Bloomsbury, with Alison Hennessy, who's my editor there, she was like, do you think you could write a second one, as a series? And I was like, yes. And then I was like, what do I say? Like, I don't actually, and it was just one of those things that you're just like, you're in a meeting and you'll say basically whatever to make that person sort of be, And so she was like, great. And it sort of went very fast from like that to being like, so could it be done in like a year's time? And me be like, yes.
Of course you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then there was that thing of like, literally, you go on Google and you're like, how to write a novel. And there's like literally 50 million things. And then, and I do know this because I have done it, you go on Google and how to write series of novels and there's nothing. I was like,
Wow. There's one thing that a lot of authors who've been on this show have all kind of said in kind of a similar fashion, that their deadlines never get met. Did you meet your deadline?
You see, I was a journalist for a very long time.
Oh, there you go. So
if I get a deadline, I'm like on that.
Right, so what we're going to do is part 2 of the show. We're going to find out all about The Hunt and the Kill, which is your latest book, the third in the series. Is that correct? Yes. So we're going to have a little look at that. Play this video and we will find out. So, Holly, tell everybody what The Hunt and the Kill is all about, please.
So, The Hunt and the Kill is Casey Benedict, who's my investigative journalist, does a lot of undercover work. Here's about an antibiotic, and it's basically looking at how pharmaceutical companies operate, fictional pharmaceutical companies operate, and it takes from Mauritius to Zimbabwe to Poland, just trying to track down what's happening with this drug. And it also looks quite a lot at antibiotic resistance. Sorry, halfway through I was trying to say antimicrobial resistance, which is usually what it's called, but for some reason, anyway, which is a huge issue that is going to cause more and more trouble. It's been called the silent pandemics. It's something that was as an entire world sleepwalking into, and I found it completely fascinating, and it is like a really it's a really important thing. Basically, my interest came about it because my best friend did a PhD in the subject, her second PhD, and we were out celebrating that, and one of the other sort of incredibly brilliant scientists, I was like, so why are you interested in antibiotic resistance? And he went, because it's going to kill you. And I was like, oh.
Ooh, thanks. It was either that or it could have been a really long conversation at the bar, couldn't it?
Yeah, we did chat after that. It was just, it's I find it fascinating.
Brilliant. And of course, Casey Benedict has been all the way through these series as a journalist, traveling around the world, which do sound a little similar to your story. It does sound. Have many people made that assumption, even though you kind of stated that it isn't kind of based on you?
I think people do, but also not. I mean, I think, it's sort of the same thing that you get with basically. I mean, I think there are elements of, certainly my friends will be like, that's my line, like from some books. I'm like, is it though? Now it's in my book, so it's not your line anymore, is it?
Yeah, stole that, thanks.
And certainly there are sort of things that happened in newsrooms, for example, that are just lifted like absolutely wholesale, word for word. And certainly, like, some of my bosses may have had habits or foibles that may have reappeared in my books, but the revenge is.
Did you say foibles? What was that word?
Foibles. Foibles is like sort of weird little habits or unusual habits.
I like that word of the day, guys. There you go. If you didn't know what that is, like me, there's a great word. So I've got a bit of a review here that I'll read, which I like. It says, Holly takes us back into Casey's chaotic life all over again. And with the 2 previous books, I was prepared for a weekend of little communication with my husband and was not disappointed. I'm sure it went on to say, in fact, I hoped he was, and he was. So as the previous 2 books, this is a question about a series. Basically, how do you keep a person interested in a series, and how do you keep that kind of consistency throughout the stories? Are you conscious of that when you're writing them or not?
I mean, they are obviously broken down into books. So I think when you're writing a book, you're kind of, that's so much the focus that you sort of slightly do lose sight of the fact that it is a series. And there's certainly like one element of what I did with her character in the first book that if I could completely have my way, I would undo, just because it doesn't quite work in some ways. Also, her name is Casey Benedict, and there's words that you misspell every time you type them. For me, Casey is one of them every single time.
And that name is probably used quite a few times in that series.
Yes, I should be called something else. So I mean, I think like it is, writing a series is difficult in a whole raft of ways, because the one thing you have to have these because in a normal book you have your sort of narrative arc, is that right? Your main character usually goes through some sort of like experience and they come out the other end different for whatever reason. And in a series you kind of do that once and then do you learn the whole lesson again in the second book? It's quite like you kind of have to have this character at once evolving, but at the same time also still staying enough the same that they're still doing the kind of she's a crazy workaholic running around the world person, and like, do you want her to learn the lesson not to do that, at which point she becomes a bit boring. Like, you know, so it's quite difficult trying to maintain that the character growing, but also not growing enough that she's not going to be thrown in at the deep end again in the next book.
I mean, you could, in a kind of funny way, you could set up, say, big twist down the line writing a series if you're kind of that plan ahead of time. Are you a kind of pantster or plotter? What's your style?
I am definitely. I'm a pantser, but I should be a plotter. My books are definitely better when I do a bit more plotting in advance. And, you know, sometimes you write them and you're like, oh, this is fine. You get to like the last 10,000 words. You're like, this is not fine at all. Nothing of this makes sense. And there's no way of resolving this. So I am gradually learning to do a bit more plotting as I go through. And actually, as a process of when you're talking with an editor about what you're doing next, it's actually really helpful to write. I have to write a synopsis and you know, do all that. And for me, that's really helpful. Because sometimes you write yourself into like absolute holes, and you know, 25,000 words ago, you know, you did something wrong, and you know, here you are.
Do you have a kind of decent relationship with your editor in terms of working out sort of plot holes and issues and all these great things? I mean, I personally think if I was in that situation and I thought, right, this is definitely the best draft, this is it now, and they came back and said no, change all that, I might get a bit miffed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why it's so important to have an editor you really appreciate, because like, you know, Alison's incredibly good at being like, this isn't working for precise, you know, sometimes as a writer, you're like, oh, this broadly speaking is fine. And actually Alison is super, like, just like zones in, like, nope, that bit's not fine. That, you know, you're sort of, and, you know, that's always a bit that's been really hard to write, because that's why you've kind of ignored it and glossed over. You know, so it's not, it's, I've definitely had, like, you know, so most editors will get the book in the first draft. Well, it's not ever the first draft because it's been past your agent. And, you know, so it goes into her, and then she'll write a kind of author's letter. She'll go, you know, and for structural edits, the first round of edits. And the author's letter, she's so nice, but definitely for the second book, it was like, in between all the being nice, it did basically boil down to like, sure about you know, this beginning, and the ending's not quite working for me, and and this bit in the middle, I think we can cut, you know, 10,000 words or whatever. And I was like,
so which bit do you like?
She made her like real effort, you know, but and that obviously, like, getting that letter, it was even though she was really nice about it and, you know, everything else, it was quite a kind of like, that's not what I wanted to get.
Wow, incredible. Do you have any advice then for someone who is either starting a series or discovering they're going to write one or wanting to write a series?
I mean, just like little things. So I have in my computer, it's just called cast list, which is literally just every single person in the book. And, you know, I've got that for 4 books now, so that runs to a lot of pages. And then also really, really helpful to have like a separate folder, which is the name, and then what they look like, what color their eyes are, you know, all the stuff, which is really obvious, but actually it's incredibly easy to forget, like, oh, what color are these people's eyes, and actually surprisingly difficult to find it in like so yeah, stuff like that, like really basic things, you know, just the kind of logistics of it. Yeah,
that's amazing. Someone did say before on the show that they had like an interview sheet, and they'll actually mentally interview the character they've created to find out kind of what they like to eat and all these things. And then they have that kind of in a similar fashion where if you need to reference that character, you know what they're into, right?
Yeah, no, it's really, and it's definitely because sometimes I find that as you're writing, you sort of drift away from how you remember that character, how that character was at the start. And although that's really useful, I mean, like, and sometimes the character takes you off in strange directions you weren't expecting. Sometimes it is really helpful to go back to like, oh, this person does like fish and chips, and you know, whatever it is. I see that'd be really, really helpful, actually.
I can imagine that definitely working in a series setting, because if you're writing book 1 3-4 years ago, you're definitely going to forget parts of that character, right?
I absolutely. When you were like talking just now about you know, that sticks in the memory, to the line sticks in the memory, that review, and I was like, yes, unless you're trying to remember like these details, like what is the kind of, I don't know, the diarist at your fictional newspaper called, or what, what's the chief sub called, stuff like that. It's really helpful to have those notes down somewhere.
Yeah, Linda says how many times I've had to go back and remember a character's appearance, for example. They're definitely things that you can. You could save the hard work if you're getting into writing or thinking about this now by taking this advice, because it does happen and there's definitely something you'll forget. So as silly as it might seem at the time to write down these extra little details, they could pay benefits as you go down there. And something I did as a very distracted writer these days, because I do the show and all these things, that I go back to a story often, sometimes weeks, and if I'm being completely honest, sometimes months later. I'll write a scene and I'll think, what happened in the last scene? So I've got to go and read where I've come from to then carry on writing the story. So, that's just laziness on my part, really. But keep at it.
That's I'm because so when I'm writing every day, so I'll write. So even and then I go back and read what I've written the day before and go through sort of fixing that. And then by the time I've got to starting new writing, I'm sort of in the sort of pattern again, and the kind of So
you almost light draft the previous chapter before you start on the next, or the phase.
Exactly. I do kind of a very brief edit on the last, let's say, 1,000 words or whatever it is I've written the day before. Sometimes less than that.
Interesting. Maybe I should adapt that situation policy.
It's really helpful because then by the time you get to the end of it, you're like, oh, okay, right, I'm sort of into that sort of, going in the right direction again.
Speaking about your cast, it gave me an idea of cast as in TV optioned. If you were having your books optioned or your series optioned into TV or film, would you have a cast in mind?
So Cassie, it has actually been optioned, which is really... Yeah, there you go. It has been optioned. So they are, at the moment, they're doing a script for it, which is very exciting indeed. And so so actually the script writer is great, and we spend a lot of time discussing random things. One of them is definitely who Casey would be, and so on and so forth. When I was do you know what, in my head, Casey was always quite an actress called Rebecca Hall, who has got that kind of combination of she's very beautiful, but also can very kind of be kind of, she doesn't, when she's dressed up, she dominates the room, and when she's not, she can sort of disappear a bit more, and that's so important with an undercover character. And she's got that real kind of intelligence as well, which I think is so important for these actresses, because you wouldn't want somebody who kind of, you'd have to. I mean, for me, the main priority would be the sense of there's a real intelligence there. And the scriptwriter's fantasy Casey character is, I think, at the moment, Vanessa Kirby, although it does change.
Brilliant. Brandon says, I have a page on Pinterest that I save pictures on for faces, weapons, buildings, etc. in his series, which is another great idea. Yeah. So having a place to kind of keep those. And Pinterest, of course, you can create the board, so that's quite a good place to go and put your characters. So I like that. Yeah. Thank you, Brandon. Let's jump. Go on. Sorry.
In the book I'm writing at the moment, I've got addresses, which weirdly I've kind of looked up on Google Maps, and then some random house somewhere, I'm like, this is where this person grew up, and do you know what I mean? But actually, I find that's actually really important. And sometimes I go back and look at this house, which is somewhere in Bromley, and I'm like, hello, there's somebody who lives in a house in Bromley who would obviously think that was quite weird, but yes.
I absolutely agree with that process, because I did it for my second book, which weirdly ended up in Quebec. I don't know why, but then I Google Street viewed one of the streets, and every part of that street is always not referenced always, but that's where it happened. So it's it's quite a good assisting tool, is Google Street View.
Hugely.
Yeah, definitely. So let's go into part 3. We got just over 15 minutes, so I want to get some questions in from you guys in the chat. So if you have questions for Holly or for myself, or for both of us, of course, please send them in, and I'll ask some questions to warm this conversation up in the back end. So let's play part 3. Okay, Holly, let's get straight into the WCCS questions. The first one, let's go with if you could take any character from the world of fiction, whether that be TV, film, literature, and throw that into, say, your book, or take them out for the day, what character are you choosing and why?
I think it would almost, and this is going to reveal my slightly lowbrow taste, although actually no, they're not lowbrow because she's a genius. I would probably be a Jilly Cooper character just because they'd all be so much fun. Like, I love the way she writes characters. I love, her characters are just always having so much fun, or they're in like heartbreak, despair, or something else like that. So I think for either date, because some of the male characters are just sort of heaven, or I'm just in case my partner's watching this, like, no, obviously this is my head, darling.
Fictional.
Fictional, all made up. And then also the female characters are just great as well. They're just kind of, well, some of them are. Some of them are a bit worried about their weight and boring stuff like that. But I think that's where I'd go.
Amazing. Okay, if you could change the ending to anything, again, TV, film, or literature, what ending are you going to change? It doesn't have to be a bad ending. It could be for good reasons. But have you got one in mind?
Do you know what I really object to is, again, my lowbrow taste or highbrow taste? In The Devil Wears Prada, which is obviously both a book and a film, that whole thing really irritates me because it's just this woman who's working in a magazine. Okay, it's not the magazine she wants to be working in, but she's only meant to be working there for a year, and then she can go off and do whatever she wants within this magazine empire. And she just throws her toys out, and her boyfriend, who is awful, is constantly like, oh, you're working too hard and this, that, and the other. And you're like, you're in your early 20s. Like, what else are you going to be doing right now? And it's just, I think, because I actually went to watch The Devil Wears Prada at the time. I was working at the Sunday Times. A group of us went to watch it. And at the time, the Sunday Times was quite a challenging working environment. And it was just we all came out being like, well, she wasn't asked anything that hard. It was fine.
Yeah. What are you whinging about? Come on.
But I think in that film, she's very kind of she basically gets sort of told by her friends and her boyfriend that she's sort of working too hard and being a bit daft, and then she packs in this job which would have taken her anywhere. And this is revealing me to be a real kind of workaholic, sad case. But at the same time, I was. As a result, I had a really
flies around the world. It sounds a bit like your character. Brilliant. That's a great answer. I mean, I've seen that film and I definitely don't remember it. I don't remember it much at all, to be honest with you. But I'm guessing if I ever see that again, I'll have to keep an eye out for that.
I think it must have popped up on Netflix or Amazon Prime recently, and in my kind of I live in Devon, so I watch a lot of those two things now. I must have watched it, and I was just watching it, being like, no, I don't like this.
Brilliant. Okay, what one book would you take for a desert island, for example? If you're going to get stuck on there, what one book would you choose? You could only have one.
Tricky. Oh, I don't know. Do you know what? I think actually my absolute favourite is Possession by A.S. Byatt. So I think that's probably what I would take with me. But that's a really random one. But I don't know why that sprung to mind. Also, I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith, which I could quite happily read again and again and again. Or anything by Jilly Cooper, because frankly, if you're on your desert island, you probably need your spirits kept up. So one of those.
Brilliant. 3 choices. I like it. We've got a question from Linda, so let's go with this. Linda says, if you found a genie in a bottle and get 3 wishes, with the stipulation that all 3 wishes must be for someone else, I like that, what would you wish for?
At the moment, I'm just sort of so I don't know the politics of people on this thing. I mean, I know, but I just, at the moment, you're just it would not be terribly amiable towards our current government.
No, we tend not to do politics on this show. We like sacrifice, death, and goats and stuff. Thrillers,
okay.
Dark stuff. Not
fair
politics.
enough. What would I be doing? I'm going to think about. Oh, crikey! This is really hard. 3 wishes.
It is quite hard. Yeah. Maybe if you do one, I'll try and think of one.
You do one as well. Yes.
We'll try and do one together.
God, it's really difficult. I think one of my friends at the moment is trying to write a book and trying to find a publisher, and I go for her finding a publisher because that would be really great, and it's a really fantastic book. And then also I would just thinking of my daughter at the moment, who's 2 and has incredibly specific views about everything from how much hot chocolate is appropriate to. I think maybe Izzy finding a degree of peace and tranquility would be good for everyone.
Is there an answer to how much hot chocolate is appropriate?
Well, first of all, I'm not allowed to put it in. It's got to be her putting it in. And she's 2, so she doesn't realize I see through her master plan to put all the hot chocolate in the hot chocolate cup. But yes, no, it's 2 is an interesting time.
Well, I'll keep this simple. I'll wish for you to have better Wi-Fi capabilities in Dartmoor, because that is a very derelict place that's wonderful and creepy all the same. Brandon is being very lovely here. He says, I wish for the show to become mainstream. Thanks, Brandon. Who has also asked a classic question on this show. Star Wars or Star Trek? Holly?
I think it has to be Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to admit, I haven't watched much of either.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Not what Brandon's looking for there. Sorry, Brandon.
No, I'd say Star Wars, Brandon. You know that, and the new Obi-Wan series is out on Disney. Fantastic. Let me know if you've seen that, by the way. And also, off topic, the new Top Gun. Have you seen that, Holly?
No, I haven't. I'm dying to. It's
my
amazing.
Goodness. Do you know when someone says to you, watch this, it's amazing, I normally go and see it and think it wasn't that good. I went to see this and thought, this is amazing. I can't even explain why it's so good, but honestly, if you're into Top Gun at any level, go to the cinema and see it. It's just brilliant. And they all did all the flying stunts.
Yeah.
They did all the flying
who isn't
themselves,
in Top Gun? This is the thing.
Okay. Anya's got a question. Thank you, Anya. She says, what is a movie to watch again for any reason?
I think there's a few rom-coms. I think it's kind of weird when you look back at noughties rom-coms, when you see the woman character is just so irritating and do you mean it just drives you a bit sort of I'm trying to think of an example now that isn't too awful. Do you know one of the things? I mean, I would watch it again because I loved it, but I was when I rewatched some of the Sex and the City when Just Like That came out, the most recent series. I sort of look back, and you do look back at that now, and you're like, wow, this is not how I remembered it at the time. You know what I mean? I suppose it was so of its time, but when you're looking at it now, you're like, oh my god, these characters are really awful. They're just so whiny and but I would still watch it just because I would. But
I really don't think that 90s kind of rom-coms, they haven't lived on, and there's some classics in there, like 10 Things I Hate About You, those sorts of things that just don't exist anymore. And I think it's kind of like a good era of those sort of just light comedies that you could put on at any kind of time of day, and things that aim so big now that they put massive productions in to try and make them super good films, but you don't feel like you could just whack any of those films on anymore.
No, exactly. No, I think you're right. And some of them have dated really badly in kind of weird ways. This is just revealing so much but I was watching one with Reese Witherspoon recently, and I can't remember the name of it. But at one point the character is this cutesy wootsy little girl, kind of Southern belle, just cheerfully outs one of the characters in the middle of this bar. And this is where and the film just sort of whips on and kind of that doesn't matter. And you're like, wait, what? What just happened? And these things have suddenly become really, really dated in a whole lot of ways. You look back at them when you're deep in the Netflix hole, which I spend a lot of time in at the moment.
I think a lot of people do spend a lot of time in those at the moment. Brandon says American Pie did not age well.
No, exactly. I think Brandon and I have got the same algorithm with Netflix.
Yeah. I think I remember some parts of those films, but it's been a while since I've seen those, definitely. Linda says the same. I wish for everyone in WCCS to find joy and success. That's so nice of you all. Lovely people. Linda also says, what is your favorite writing trope, not including your own?
Crikey. What's that?
That's quite a tough question with not including your own at the end. Have you got a writing trope that you do like?
I always like a bit of sort of flashbacks for characters, but that kind of makes sense as the book goes on. But I think it's quite hard to pull off. I don't think I do it very, very well. Quite often they get edited out.
Okay.
Yes. Oh no, there are 9 American Pie films. 9 of them. Crikey. That's a lot of American Pie.
I didn't think there were that many, and that's kind of like the Fast and the Furious saga. That's got to end, right? That's still going. 16 Candles.
And then Scream. I just saw Is it like the main actress in Scream has been like, I'm not coming back for the 6th or 7th or something, and because she's not been paid enough, and good for her being insisting on that point. But like, you know, you're just like, wow, Scream's still going. Like, who knew?
It's incredible. Well, that's one thing that is still going, and that has lived on from the 80s and 90s is the horror world, because you get like Freddy Krueger still going and all these things, and Scream's still there. That is one genre that's still going. Is 16 Candles not the film that you're on about, is it? With Drew Barrymore?
No, I'm just trying to think. I could look it up, but I can't remember. It's just like got Reese Witherspoon, who goes down to like somewhere like Alabama. It might be called Sweet Home Alabama, actually. Now it's come to me, and it's just like a random rom-com I found myself watching, and I was just like, it's just quite weird. You're just like, well, this character, and he's like, oh, she's so sweet and endearing and blonde, and then she like just ruthlessly outs the character, and like it's kind of like, oh, banter. And you're like, what is it?
Yeah. Frowned upon. Okay, last couple of questions then before we wrap this up. Let's see if that was one in the chat there. Legally Blonde, was it that Roster said?
No, it wasn't Legally Blonde.
No.
Which remains a classic. I think we all recognise
that. What is the last book or film that you read or watched?
The last film, I think we've already established that my taste is so terrible that we probably shouldn't go there. Last book was Ruth Ware's One by One. That because I don't know why that one in particular, but I just know that's the last one I read.
Have you got any?
I like Ruth Ware's books a lot, so yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a favourite author?
Oh God, that's a dangerous question.
It is quite tough. You don't have to answer that if specifically, or just an author you're really into at the moment.
At the moment, I'm really, Ellery Lloyd. I say Sweet Home Alabama. I was like, yes, your terrible taste can be confirmed. Ellery Lloyd, so that's a husband and wife writing team, who are both very good friends of mine, so for full disclosure, and they write books together, which I find extraordinary, because my partner and I we can't load the dishwasher together, let alone anything else. But their second book, The Club, came out recently, and I really enjoyed that. It's just very it's just a good sort of sitting on the beach read. So I enjoyed that.
So they write together a book together as a couple.
Yeah,
that is fascinating.
I've no idea how they do it.
There must be a massive time commitment there. I'm assuming, do they have kids?
They've got one child, yes.
Okay.
But they actually seem to write it. They wrote their first one when their daughter was very small. I think it was basically their daughter basically never slept. So I think they just wrote this book while they were pushing the pram around a park for hour after hour. And the first one they wrote, which is called People Like Her, that one is very much kind of like, it's a husband and wife talking in different chapters. So it's kind of like, you could see how it evolved as a way of doing it. But Colette, who is obviously the wife in the situation, well, not obviously, but it is the wife in the situation, she says it's great because you kind of leave the book and you come back a day later and there's like an extra 1,500 words and you're like, brilliant. Or the flip of that is that she'll be like, they do it on Google Docs, so you can see when the other person's writing and everything. And she's like, you know, like Paul will merrily cut out a paragraph and Colette will be like, stop that, I like that one.
Wow, that is impressive, and it's like having a writing fairy there that just fills in your work. It's brilliant.
Yeah, exactly.
But at the same time deletes it, which is not good. Okay, let's have a couple more before we wrap this up. What one song is your go-to for karaoke? Do you have one?
Oh gosh, I'm like a terrible singer, to the point that, like, you know, when you're every having like a really drunken fun time at karaoke, and then like if I start singing, somebody will actually just take the microphone off me and be like, no.
Give me this now.
And actually, I think maybe like Sweet Home Alabama is going to have to resurrect here, because it's a good song to sing, right?
Definitely, you can go with that. And let's move it up to a more serious side of things now. What does literary success look like for you? I mean, at what point when you look back in the future do you think, you know, I'm happy this happened?
I mean, actually, To the Lions winning the Steel Dagger is sort of like, I don't know, I feel like I'm like, okay, I'm done now. This is great. Yeah. I think for me, like at the moment, because I've got 2 small children, and like being in a situation where I can just write and that be my job is amazing. So that I just feel really, I mean, like, you know, I'm certainly very long way from J.K. Rowling, but it's just really great right now to kind of to be able to do that, because for me it's sort of really I really enjoy sort of basically just switching off from children, which sounds awful, but it's sort of just, you know, they take over your life to such an extent. And I'm very much like, I sort of just, you know, I can just switch into writing, and it's just, that's what I'm doing, and I love it. So yeah, I'm happy.
Fantastic goal to have. Yeah, and achievable, and you are doing it, so well done. Okay, last one. Where can people find more about you? Where can they get your books?
Well, I'm on Twitter. Should be more visible there, but so it's Holly_what. I also have a website, which is I think hollywhat.co.uk, but that's a little bit incompetently run. And books are available in all good bookshops, and obviously Amazon. Go to the bookshops because they're great. Yeah, that's it.
Well, if you are watching or listening to this, thank you for doing that. And if you go in the description of the podcast or the video, you will find links there. And of course, on Twitter, if you're following us, you will see the retweets with Holly's name there. So just click on that, give her a follow, and, you know, say weird things about 90s films. Why not? Holly, thank you so much for joining me. Honestly, it's been a pleasure. I've loved hearing about all your adventures, and I'm sure with the kind of accolades you've won awards for your journalism and your writing, they're going to continue as well. I have no doubt of that. So thank you for joining me. And
thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for having me on.
Not a problem at all. Guys, for tuning in, thank you so much. Season 9 is back. I can't wait to see show you the next guest coming up, and the Harrogate Crime Writers Festival is coming back. It's going to be crazy. Please, if you have suggestions for guests, please put them in email like I've asked you. I'm sure I'll get onto them and try and get them in for you guys. And that's it. Season 9 is back. Thank you, guys. Look after yourselves, and I will see you with a brand new show next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye.